Welcome to the Art of the Zag. I'm Joe Laser.
And I'm Shane Snow.
Shane, I have a question for you.
All right.
What's your pdoom?
My pdoom.
Your pdoom.
Okay, so I don't know what pdoom is, but I recently had a kidney stone. And if you know anything about kidney stones, there's a point where you're supposed to pee out the kidney stone, which is like this terrifying thing you're waiting for a number of days.
I'm actually shuddering.
I feel like I've been living in a state of pdoom for some time. This was, a month ago, but one of the worst waiting periods of my life and general experiences of my life. So what's my pdoom? It was a month ago.
That's like the Sunday scaries on steroids, I feel like. It's like we're worried about what Zoom meeting you have at 8 a.m. on Monday, like having to just anticipate this stone that you need to pee out of your own body, like feels like the highest level, like the boss mode of Sunday scaries.
It's honestly horrible. Anyone who's watching or listening to this, drink water, hydrate, get your calcium. Like, I never want a kidney stone again. It is not what you're asking though with pdoom. So tell me what's pdoom?
So pdoom, I can tell that you haven't been as steeped in the weird, nerdy, bizarre AI world as I have been the last few years. So it got really popular as a conversation starter at a cocktail party sort of thing, right after ChatGPT came out. Because pdoom is your percent chance that you think that AI is going to kill us all, essentially. That AI is going to be like existential risk, wipe out the planet, nuclear war, turn us all into paper clips, whatever it might be.
Okay, yeah, my pdoom is high. I will say, I think you know this, but I'm friendly with the guy who's the director of the Global Catastrophic Risk Institute, which is this think tank in New York that like briefs the United Nations on things that could wipe us all out. And when I first met him, I was doing a story for Wired. I asked him to like list the most likely things that will wipe us out, like in ranked order. And the number one was nuclear holocaust, which is obviously it's terrifying. And AI was on that list. But I want to say 6 months ago, I emailed him and again, after all this progress with AI, and I asked him like, hey, has AI taken over from nukes as the number one thing that could wipe us all out? And he said, definitely yes. So that's not a great sign that someone whose job is to to calculate the odds is saying that that AI is now the most threatening thing to mankind. But I'm not surprised. That's why I asked him. I hope it's not 100%, but I would say my pdoom is pretty high then.
Is it about 50%?
Yeah. Like if I don't want it to be more than that, but even 50% is way too high. Like if you ask me, but yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of faith in everyone who's developing AI is going to be a good actor, and I think that is is really scary. Much less, just that these things get away from us.
I don't understand why you got kidney stones. You're so busy being anxious about AI killing us all that you forgot to drink any water.
Forgot to drink water, man. Yeah, watch out, everybody. You don't want to go early. Like if the Terminator kills you, you've made it further than me with, kidney stones get me first.
Well, I actually feel like there's probably like a Venn diagram overlap between the nuclear holocaust and the AI killing us all, because it's like if AI gets control of our weapons and we have automated response systems, that increases the risk. That happens in the new Ian McEwan book, to give a little spoiler in the backstory. So, but it doesn't kill all of humanity, so maybe it's not that bad.
Well, for real, this guy, I first met him because I saw him give a talk at a thing called Nerd Night, and the name of the talk was, it's basically where scientists get drunk and give presentations, and the talk was, which will kill us first, aliens or robots? This was like 10 years ago. And I came up to him afterwards after he charted out like, how likely are there aliens and will they be harmful, or benevolent or not, and how likely will we develop AI and will it be benevolent or not? I came up to him afterwards, the same guy, that's how I got to know him. So I said, would aliens like confront the same problem with their own, robots before they could even get to us? And he like dead serious, like looked me in the eye and said, any aliens that land here to destroy humanity will be the robotic descendants who had destroyed the organic aliens that created them. Like, oh, man. Holy shit. So, yeah.
That is dark. Guy sounds like a really fun hang. So I go down this line of questioning because of our guest on today's The Art of the Zag, which is Daniel Balsam, the CTO and co-founder of Goodfire, who we just talked to. Goodfire just raised at a $1.25 billion valuation for a year and a half old company, which is absurd, raising $150 million Series B. But they are maybe the one company, and Dan is one of the one person who has lowered my personal pdoom a little bit. Because the thing that terrifies me about AI, as I've come to learn more about it over the last several years, is just how much of a black box AI is, right? That essentially, like, we've gone in this direction of AI development that's led to these breakthrough in LLMs, thanks to the work really that's been pushed forward by OpenAI as the first company to invest in this in a really big way, with this idea that if we just take all of this data that we've scraped off the internet and we put it into a large language model, we essentially grow this neural network or AI brain, right, that comes to understand the world through language. And then suddenly it can do tons of things that we never thought it would be able to do before. It can speak Spanish, it can solve math problems, it can code, it can do all these things that are really mysterious. But we've been pumping all of this money into our AI economy, basically betting the entire economy on it. All of our GDP growth is essentially right now coming from AI. But in Silicon Valley, it almost takes on this mystical element. Like, we don't quite know how it works or why it works the way that it does. We have very limited capabilities to look inside the AI models and understand what's going on. And Dan, who, full disclosure, is my brother-in-law, he decided, because he's actually one of the smartest and most ethical people that I know, and after ChatGPT came out, which you'll hear him talk a little bit about, this was the one big problem that he thought he could help solve in the world, is like this existential risk of AI. So he started Goodfire, which was pursuing this relatively obscure and not that well-regarded path of AI research called interpretability that would allow us to essentially perform brain scans on AI models to understand what nodes are lighting up when AI is doing certain things, and then perform a sort of brain surgery on the models to make them perform better. As you'll hear, Dan doesn't love the brain surgery metaphor. I think it's the easiest way to explain it in layman's terms, right? But the fact that people like Dan are working on this and the advancements that they've made is one of the things that gives me at least a little bit of hope in this dark, strange, weird, wonderful path of AI that we're going down.
Yeah, I have to say, I felt better at the end of this interview that we just did than I did at the beginning about the state of AI and about the potential. So maybe my doom factor went down over the course of that 40 minutes, which is nice. It's definitely, there's still risks, but the fact that there are really clever people out there thinking about these problems in the way that Dan is and his team at Goodfire does give me a lot of comfort. And I'll say a nice, I hadn't met Dan, before this, even though you had. It's a fantastic example, what they're doing, of what we are exploring at Art of the Zag. Everyone in the AI industry thinks that AI is going this direction and needs to be developed this way, and these are the problems that we can solve and that we can know, and these are the ones that we can't. And he and his team created a company that tackled a lot of that stuff head on. They're going against the grain with a lot of this stuff, and it might just be what prevents the Terminator or prevents us from sort of collapsing under the weight of AI before we can get the benefits of it. So I'm pretty pleased with what I learned in this interview, for sure.
Yeah, I think if you want some cocktail conversation on one of the most interesting and little known approaches to AI safety and also effectiveness, like the research that they're doing is allowing models to hallucinate a lot less, to perform a lot better. This is an episode you're definitely going to want to listen to. A couple disclosures that should make before we get into the interview. One is that I am a very small investor in Goodfire. Honestly, I wish I was a bigger investor.
Yeah, like by the end, I was like, wow, why did I not invest? I didn't know anything about this.
Try to get in more, but got in a little bit in like the friends and family portion of the seed round. So keep that bias in mind as we always espouse journalistic ethics here at the Art of the Zag. The second is that Dan is someone who's very honest about the state of Silicon Valley and the AI industry and where there are shortcomings. So we want to really emphasize that everything expressed here is the opinion and perspective of Dan and not of Goodfire or any of its investors. So keep that in mind. He was relatively restrained, but Dan's an honest guy and willing to speak about where he would like to see AI going from a policy perspective, and what the acceleration roadmap of AI should really look like. So want to get that out of the way. Shane, before we kick it off, anything else from you?
You know what? I think I'd be curious what anyone listening to this, what their pdoom, let's say, reduction factor is after listening to this interview. Now, after just going through this intro itself, I'd say my pdoom reduction factor is minus 20%.
Minus 20%. All right, yeah. So drop it in the comments. What was your pdoom before listening to the interview with Dan, and what was it after? All right, let's cue the music. Dan Balsam, welcome to the Art of the Zag.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about the story of Goodfire and how in, as you just said, a year and a half, I can't believe it's only been a year and a half, you've become a unicorn. Yeah,
so my personal story started around the launch of ChatGPT. I was head of AI at the last startup that I worked at, and I've been building startups for over a decade. But around the launch of ChatGPT, I think it became very clear to me that general purpose systems were coming soon. Before that, machine learning was widely deployed, but really true general purpose intelligence didn't seems pretty far away. Around GPT 3.5, ChatGPT, I think I just very quickly realized at that point that there was nothing that was going to prevent the rapid improvement of general purpose AI capabilities. I personally decided, I've always been very impact motivated, trying to figure out how I can use what I know how to do, which is build things for positive impact in the world. And it just became clear to me really quickly that somehow working in AI was the single highest impact thing that I could be pursuing. So I ultimately chose to leave my job, Ripple Match, and then spent a while thinking about what I wanted to build. And ultimately, with my co-founders, Eric and Tom, we decided that interpretability, so that's reverse engineering AI systems, understanding how they actually work under the hood, was what we felt the most important unsolved problem in the world. And so we decided to start a company to solve that problem. To explain that quickly for a second.
I was going to say, what is this, the thing underlying that? I mean, interpretability is a new term for me. But the thing that you're hinting at is people don't understand the AI they're building? Yeah,
I think maybe people are familiar with the term black box, to describe AI. But I think that really doesn't even fully paint the severity of the picture.
Oh no.
Chris Olah at Anthropic was popularized a metaphor that I think is really useful here, which is that people are surprised to learn that AI is grown rather than programmed.
We don't program them, we don't make them. We grow them. We have these neural network architectures that we design, and we have these loss objectives that we create. And the neural network architecture, it's kind of like a scaffold that the circuits grow on.
It's in many ways more akin to a biological or evolutionary process, how we create AI, than it is to say traditional software engineering. There's these general purpose learning algorithms that are trained on massive amounts of data. So everybody knows ChatGPT was trained on the internet. In the process of being trained on all of this data, it learns a little bit about how the world works. And then ultimately you can use this for all types of things, right? Now code is very close to being fully automated. And we can talk more about that later. But this all happened from general purpose algorithms. There was no intention behind it. Human beings didn't say, didn't design an AI with specific properties that they care about, as much as they just, sort of put the plant in the pot, gave it water and sunlight, and watched what it grew into.
Wow. Just connected it to the internet and said, go forth and become something?
Exactly, yes. And the reality is that while interpretability has made a lot of progress in the past few years, we're not the only people working on interpretability. Certainly was the case around the launch of ChatGPT, and nobody understood how these systems actually worked. And, Our knowledge here has improved a lot, which is why we're able to do some of the exciting things that we can do now with interpretability. But nonetheless, these are almost like alien brains that we've created and brought into the world. And we're going to be putting these alien brains in charge of mission critical, high risk decision making across the entire economy. That's already starting to happen. And that process is going to accelerate. The economic incentives are just too great. And in my mind, I think there's a pretty clear choice between two futures. There's a future where we understand, deeply understand these alien minds, and there's a future where we don't. And I just want to do everything I can to nudge humanity towards a future where we're in, the passenger seat, let alone the driver's seat, as these systems take more and more control over the economy.
So this is the thing that's always really baffled me about the AI industry as I learn more about it. Right, that we're pumping trillions of dollars, basically making this entire bet on our economy, on this technology. And inside of Silicon Valley, there seems to be so little understanding of how AI actually works, right? It's like, okay, we've pursued this approach of scaling large language models. We've scraped all this information on the internet. We fed into this neural network that we're essentially growing, right? And then we're surprised when it can do new things. We don't know exactly how it works. So one question that I have for you, being more of a Silicon Valley insider than either of us, is just like, what the hell and how? And then maybe you can explain a little bit on how interpretability works that will allow us to mitigate a lot of the risks that this comes with, because honestly, this framing of AI keeps me up at night and has terrified me ever since I've realized that this is the reality of where the industry is going.
It keeps me up at night too, and that's why I started this company. I think it's quite alarming that this technology is being developed by a handful of people in Silicon Valley that are going full steam ahead. And most people, I think, in this country, maybe in the world, are not accelerationists. Like they don't want this technology to be being developed. But the economic incentives are extremely strong because what you can do once you start having things that are approximating human level intelligence inside of your computers, you can start automating labor. And so the vision here that a lot of these companies have set forth with, and you can talk about the good and the scary parts of that vision, has been to find ways to automate intellectual work. And I think now we're starting to see models that are increasingly capable of doing that. This is unprecedented in the history of science, the distance between our understanding of how these systems actually work and the real world impact that they are already having. Maybe one analogy that's kind of useful is if you think about agriculture, maybe, I kind of think of technology all as this continuous curve of, you go from agriculture to industrialization to electricity to computers to AI, and it's all kind of related and all related to this sort of idea of automating labor in some way, shape, or form. And if you go back to agriculture specifically, in the early days, in the beginning, people just threw seeds around, right? And then, some of the seeds grew, some of the seeds didn't. They learned from that. They learned to place the seeds a certain distance from each other, depending on the crop, so they could grow better seeds. But famine was common until very, very recently in human history because our fundamental understanding of the science of agriculture was very weak. And in the 20th century, that really changed. Of course, there's still hunger around the world, but the science of how to grow food has, in many cases, produced a surplus of food. There are countries like the United States which produce more food than they need all of the time, which is, historically, was not the case. Yeah. And so, unfortunately, I think building AI is in the seed scattering phase right now. And the thing that we're trying to do is bring it into, the modern era in order to be able to grow AIs with the properties that we want, that behave the way that we want, and do it. We like to use the phrase intentional design. So intentionally designing AIs versus, throwing some seeds around and hoping for the best.
Well, because if you look at sci-fi, a lot of how AI is depicted in, our imagination of, sort of the outcomes, it gets away from us, in a lot of cases. Yeah. And so I guess to summarize my understanding, what y'all are trying to do is study how these AIs are being grown, like a botanist or a biologist or whatever the metaphor is, so that they don't sort of grow out of control and then get away from us. How, and if that's right, how do you do that?
Yeah, no, I think the biology metaphors are really great. Those were also popularized by Chrysola and Anthropic. If you look at the sort of history of biology, really biology started making a lot of progress in the 19th century, with the invention of tools like microscopes, so we could actually start studying cells and we could start piecing together all of these complex systems that make us up and how they actually work. And, in 150 years, the progress in fundamental understanding of biology has been extraordinary. And I think of what we need to do with interpretability as like speed running that level of progress within a very short period of time, because of, how quickly AI is getting better. So one way to think about the tools that we build is like they're analogous to the tools in biology. So we build microscopes in some sense. There's different types of microscopes. Different types of microscopes can tell you different things. We actually can look at both the neurons and the connections inside these sort of alien minds. And then we can deploy our tools to act as lenses in order to understand what the model was thinking at various points, to give us insight into its decision-making processes, but then also importantly to intervene on those decision-making processes and rewire things. An analogy that I like to use is in programming. A model is kind of like a compiled program. So when you actually deploy a program, you compile the source code. That source code is, at least in the language it was originally written in, that's more human interpretable. It's no longer available. I think of interpretability as a decompiler. So it decompiles the program of the model. And of course, once you can read the source code, so to speak, you can edit the source code. I think this analogy works really well. I think, we have a long way to go before we can fully decompile the program, but I think it's sort of directionally helpful.
Yeah, I think it works really well for a specific type of audience. I think there's a large subset of the population we start talking about decompiling code that's going to be a little lost. But Shane is totally locked in.
Well, maybe we could say like it's like neuroscience for AI models. I mean, I think that's the way to describe what we do.
Yeah, when I explain Goodfire, the analogy that I've used, which maybe is oversimplified, right, but is the ability to essentially do brain scans on the neural networks, understand what nodes are lighting up when it's doing certain things, and then perform brain surgery on those models.
That's right. My only qualm with that is that brain surgery is not very precise,
Well, let's imagine that brain surgery got really, really good.
It's like, those brain surgeons, they're real, like, just ham-fisted.
If you had neuron-level brain surgery.
So a big reason that I wanted to have you on is because interpretability was such an unlikely path in some ways, right? I think now probably there's an attitude that this is the future. This is a really smart bet to be making. You guys were Anthropic's first investment. You obviously are led by an all-star group of VCs in this round. But my understanding is that a couple of years ago when you were starting Goodfire, is that the field of interpretability, although it seemed like an important thing to be pursuing for the future of AI, was not seen as the most popular avenue to take, or maybe even a very plausible path for mitigating a lot of the existential and practical risk that comes with modern AI. So can you talk a little bit about why you made that bet on interpretability and how for you thought about those doubts that people had about the path that you were taking and how you plowed through that as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, of course. That's totally right. Yeah, people thought we were crazy when we started this company for a myriad of reasons. I think at the time, interpretability has progressed enormously in the past few years. At the time, we were just maybe seeing the early signs of life and some of the techniques, the sort of microscope techniques that really were going to start working. And it was pretty common to believe something like roughly, neural networks are complex systems, it's sort of like edge of chaos types of dynamics. Like there's nothing in there for you to find. There's no structure there that you can take advantage of to try to understand or improve the model. It's all just complex systems. It's like, trying to predict a hurricane or whatever else it is. Funny enough, AI models are getting pretty good at that. But,
That's good news.
yeah, but I think that was the most dominant view at the time. Some people still hold that view, but much, much fewer, I think, seeing all the progress that folks have made in interpretability research. And both ourselves and like the field, which has really blossomed, both in some private institutions like Anthropic and DeepMind, but also in academia as well. Yeah, and I guess from my perspective, my question, for me, it was always like pretty obvious that if interpretability could work, it would be how you prefer to do things. I think I've been developing AI applications for quite some time, and you do a bunch of insane things when developing these to deal with the fact that you don't actually understand how they work. I don't know if you are familiar with LLM as a judge setups, but like this is a pretty classic example. So you have an LLM screen the inputs to your LLM to make sure that they are good. And then you have an LLM screen the outputs from your LLM to make sure that they're good. And this is like really common when you deploy any type of LLM application. Like people are using LLM as a judge all over the place. And like to me, that just seems like kind of crazy. Obviously, it's very good for OpenAI's bottom line. But as an engineer, it's like it's A, circular, and B,
right, it's recursive, right?
Yeah, it's totally circular, and it's like not. It still doesn't work that well. Anyone who's actually tried to build AI into an application knows that there's this long tail of problems that you can have with it, and it's like tremendously hard to actually get AI to do what you want all the time. This was even more true a couple of years ago. And I think on a fundamental level, it's just because we have no idea what's going on in there. If you understood the program, then you could fix the program. It's pretty straightforward. And it was just a question of whether that would be possible. I think at the time, most people believed that it wasn't. And, myself and my co-founders, Tom founded the interpretability team at Google DeepMind. So he's been doing this a long time and has always been a believer. But I think from my perspective, it was just like the moment I became convinced it was possible, I think it was like pretty obvious to me that like the world would be much, much better if this technology was rapidly accelerated. And we felt a private company was the correct vehicle to do that.
So on that note, I'm impressed by how non-obvious, this idea. It's like when you hear the problem, it's like, of course, someone needs to solve this problem. But if all the smartest people in AI research are saying it's just impossible, and y'all figured out a way to actually address the problem, that's amazing. But the question for me is, how does this make sense as a business? All the herd, you could say, of AI companies are building specific types of businesses. And this is something that is definitely going a different direction, aiming to help the whole industry. But like, where's the business there, and where's the, I guess, what was the thing that clicked for you that this is more than just doing a good deed to prevent us from getting killed by the Terminator, but also could be a business worth investing in?
Yeah, well, I think that core conviction just came from as I was saying, like the personally witnessing all of the crazy ways you have to wrangle AI to get it to like work reliably for any remotely high stakes application. And just being strongly convinced that there was a better way. And I think in the beginning, we were just kind of believed if interpretability can continue to make progress, like there will be ways that we can use that, and that will be valuable, because I personally experienced, and also in talking to many other folks in the tech industry, like witnessed the myriad of ways in which AI can go wrong. And then currently, it's gone a little better than it was a couple years ago, but it's still the case that like when AI goes wrong, like what do people do? They just throw their hands up. They're just like, oh, that sucks. Maybe tweak the prompt a little. I don't know, And then like tweaking prompts is this like game of whack-a-mole, et cetera. And we just wanted to, it's always been very clear to me that if you could like bring that type of engineering into designing AI systems, that would be valuable. I think the way that that's played out is that there's generally two types of sort of engagements that we have with customers, and they're kind of mingled together. But the first is what I would call like model debugging. So this is like, when my model screws up, why did it screw up? How can I make sure it doesn't screw up again? And so that's one category of work that we do. There's various things that we do, such as like inference time guardrails, things such as training, using interpretability to figure out what's broken about a model and then training a better model. But when your model's working really, really well, the other type of thing that you can do with interpretability is you can do knowledge extraction. A great example of this is in biology. So AlphaFold, I think, is the canonical example of a model that solved a task that human beings still have no idea how it solved it, really. The protein folding problem famously eluded experts for a really long time. Suddenly this machine learning solution comes in and basically that problem is solved. Still today, nobody really quite understands how it did it. And so that model, in some pretty significant sense, like knows things about the world that humans don't. And so studying the mind of such a model can reveal to us new knowledge. And so this is some of the work that I'm really personally excited about that we've been doing in the life sciences, not specifically with AlphaFold, but we've been looking at genomics and epigenetic and histopathology models, and going to where they can make superhuman predictions of some kind, and then trying to understand, like, A, is it really a superhuman prediction? Like, are they actually, how do they actually work? Can we trust this model to begin with? But then B, taking those insights and then actually bring them back out. And so recently we did this with one of our partners, Primamenta, for Alzheimer's detection. In the process of studying how their model worked, we developed a hypothesis for a type of biomarker that was not previously explored for Alzheimer's. It did have a history with cancer, but was not previously explored for Alzheimer's. And then after discovering that this was the primary signal that this epigenetic foundation model that Primamenta built was relying on, we were able to construct a proxy model relying on the signal that we had extracted from the model. By proxy model, I mean a simple model. So kind of throw away the neural net and then try to reproduce what the neural net's doing with like good old-fashioned, logistic regression, simple techniques.
Yeah, good old-fashioned logistic regression. I do that all the time.
Yeah, maybe for context, a logistic regression is a very simple type of model, like very, kind of pretty interpretable. It's kind of linear in its nature.
I'm literally just teasing you about like it's fascinating stuff in it. Yeah.
And anyways, we were able to like capitulate like a lot of the performance of the model, and we actually found that over the cohorts that we were looking at, the signals that were previously explored in the literature were less effective than the one that we pulled out of the model. And I should caveat, this was a pilot study. It's very early. We need to scale to more cohorts, but I think it's a nice early demonstration of sometimes models know things that we don't. And, interpretability is both a tool to fix the problems with the models of today, but also it's a tool for AI to human knowledge transfer. And I think that's one thing that I'm very excited about, especially as models continue to get better.
So with all the caveats in the world, right, on early research, pilot, et cetera, what are the potential ramifications of that, right? Does it mean that we can detect Alzheimer's more easily, earlier in people, potentially with discoveries like this?
Yeah, that's the goal. The goal is early detection of Alzheimer's and ultimately drug discovery. Finding druggable targets to treat Alzheimer's. So we're currently scaling to more patients, and I'm pretty excited by that. And we're also in early talks with some academic labs about potentially collaborating on wet lab analyses, really trying to close the diagnostic loop. I think with all of our life sciences work, we work with partners such as Mayo Clinic as well. We do a lot of work with them. The goal is to bring clinical utility to these models as quickly as possible and in as reliable of a way as possible. And I really deeply believe that the main avenue of upside from building AI, like a reasonable question, we can go into this. It's like, why build AI in the first place? And
right.
I have my own complicated feelings. And I think a lot of people have their own complicated feelings, but to me, the upside is like most clearly demonstrated in like what could be done in the life sciences and like rapidly accelerating medical research to just improve people's quality of life. I think like technology is always sort of dual use. Like it's been good and bad throughout history. We see it do wonderful things and we see it do difficult things, but when it are bad things. But when we see it do wonderful things, I think it's primarily because it improves people's quality of life and their health. And I think the potential here is really, really large. Because I think AIs have demonstrated time and again that if you give them enough data, that they can learn things that surprise us.
Well, this is the whole conflict and duality of AI right now, right? Is that we're being sold in the public narrative that it is worth this massive investment in AI. It's worth the cost in terms of electricity and jobs and energy and the scraping of copyrighted data from artists because it will lead to these incredible leaps in our quality of life, right? We're going to cure cancer. But then you look a lot at some companies in the AI industry. You might not want to talk smack about OpenAI and ChatGPT, like I absolutely will. And we see that actually what we're getting is like a deep fake video app / social network that's creepy as hell, or a sycophantic chatbot that's leaving people into mentally deranged mania and fits, right? And it feels like this really big conflict for a lot of people in the public between what we're being promised with AI and what is being delivered. So it feels in a way like interpretability is a way of getting us to those results that actually make AI worth it, right? We can be healthier, we can live longer, we can solve really complex problems, like, maybe we could get to a state of clean, unlimited energy, and we mitigate global warming and all the things that we're being promised. So I'm curious to hear like your thoughts on the direction that the AI industry should go in, perhaps in relation to where it's going right now and where interpretability fits into that entire equation.
So I'd start by saying, like, I think that upside is like very real. And I do think we're starting to see it. I think there's a sort of being in the Bay Area can sometimes feel like being in a hypersonic bubble in a tub of molasses or something like that. Like society, things propagate through society very slowly. I think people in the Bay Area like vastly overestimate their own rate of progress and the rate at which things propagate through society. Like things are slow to change usually. That being said, I do think that there's also been a pretty consistent trend of pointing out what the models like can't do or can barely do today. As like a means of saying like, oh, look, the promises aren't being delivered on. And then a few months later, the models get better and those promises are delivered on. Like to me, the most clear example of this is software engineering. The thing that I did for most of my career, for a decade before starting this company, I don't think it will be a profession in a year and a half.
A year and a half.
I think yeah.
Wow.
No, I think it is well on track to be fully automated. And if you checked in with people a year ago, I might have thought that, but I think a lot of people would have thought that was crazy. If you checked in 6 months ago, maybe a little more people would have thought that. And now I think if you talk to like most software engineers, most of them would agree that it's pretty clear what the trajectory of this particular form of labor is going to be.
And there you mean the actual like coding, or do you mean the entire profession, right? Like the ability to understand and manage your code base or the build, like does it wipe it out completely to the point where we just have product teams and founders coding with Claude and there's really, that role of software engineer is eliminated? Or is it just the actual writing of code becomes automated, which it seems like it's damn near 100% at a lot of companies right now, and that's accelerated quickly?
Yeah, it's a complicated question, so I'll try to dive into the details, but I think the prior is probably the better characterization, that it's full automating of the profession.
Wow.
And yeah, and the reason, so a couple of quick points on that. So first, it is so hard to disentangle macroeconomic indicators. That being said, like I do think that there's probably some evidence that you're seeing, particularly the junior end of the hiring market, like new grads being affected by automation already. And you're maybe starting to see a slowdown in senior hiring as well. I do think AI thus far, and probably will continue to be highly asymmetrical in that humans with the strongest expertise become even more valuable because they can do the things that the AIs can't. And those skills are very, very rare. And the economy itself is moving much faster. And then it's a question of like, well, how long does that go on for? And then like at some point, like, well, what even is that profession? Like, do I think there will be human beings overseeing the code that gets written by AI? Of course. You know, you'll need humans who understand code well enough to oversee it, at least for some considerable amount of time. Again, the world is molasses. Like, we're not just going to like hand full autonomy to the AIs overnight, you know, although that might happen over the long run, which again, we can talk about. But AIs are going to be able to do basically all work that can be done on a computer pretty soon. And human beings are still going to be important for a good amount of time. There's still going to be work for us to do. You know, like some new jobs will get created for some period of time. And I think those jobs will mostly look like more sort of people-facing jobs in some type of way. Like the more a job is like purely interacting with the computer, the more likely it is to be automated over the relatively short term. And then, and then we can take things from there. But I think for software engineering specifically, like I do think, you'll have engineers. Like most companies will have engineers in a year and a half. So I'm not saying that won't be the case. I'm saying that as a career profession, it will look radically different. And I think like most likely, whatever jobs are left over, like referring to them by the same name would be like somewhat disingenuous.
So just this week, I heard a story from a friend who was looking to hire an animator in the film industry, like programmatic animation. So using code to do 3D animation, and he had a candidate for this job who had just graduated college, needed a very entry-level person. This candidate took 5 days to get back to him on like schedule for like an interview, and in those 5 days, the guy who was recruiting this candidate figured out how to do the entire job using Claude Code on his own computer and didn't end up hiring the person. Yep. So like the lesson for me with that was like, like if you just graduated and you're looking for a job, like schedule the meeting now. But it's striking that in the same week I'm hearing you say now that any job that's done on a computer, like think about whether it's going to exist in a year or 2 years, and any job that's done with human to human or the value, anything where you get extra value from human to human communication, think harder about that is sort of my takeaway.
And maybe just to quickly clarify, again, like Silicon Valley is a hypersonic bubble in a tub of molasses, right? Like, I think there's one question, which is like, does the job need to exist anymore? And then there's another question, which is like, does the job exist? And so probably the best way to clarify my position would be to say, I don't think the job will need to exist in a year and a half. But will there still be people doing it in a year and a half? Probably, because things change slow.
Well, that is a huge like adoption gap thing that we're seeing right now, right? Like if every company in the world was just using the AI that exists today to the full potential that it has, we would see massive job automation. But the rate of transformation inside most enterprises, you said, is a world of molasses. It's thick as hell molasses, and that sonic boom actually stands relatively little chance against the inertia of most corporations and the way that things are going to be done. So I do think that'll slow it down, but
which is maybe good, right? Because like stuff is suboptimal now. It's like by the time.
We have no capability of dealing with the mass job displacement that's happening. Like I think that molasses is probably going to save us in a lot of ways. Like we need more molasses. Like as possible.
Make it very clear, I am not an accelerationist. Like I think humanity would benefit from having more time than I think we have to be able to brace for the impact that we're going to receive.
So is there, speaking of that time factor, right? Something that I've been wondering is there a race between the pace of interpretability research and progress and the pace of AI progress? Like, are you in a race against time to develop interpretability that can understand the models before the models get too advanced to be understood?
It's a good question. I think in some sense, yes. And Dario from Anthropic wrote an essay about this, which I think is really great, on the urgency of interpretability. I definitely think we are in a race against time to understand and models more deeply and to develop the technology class that allows for the intentional design of models. That's why we're doing what we're doing. I think it is extremely urgent that we develop this technology.
Is there a point where we, like, where we get there, where we cross sort of like the hump we need to. I think about like antivirus software, in the late 90s. And it's like there are viruses everywhere, and it's like engineers and security people are trying to, race against like the arms race of people building viruses. And then we kind of got to a point where like if you have a virus, you're really unlucky and probably didn't protect yourself. But the systems sort of have solved largely like the virus thing. Do we get to that point, or is it going to be a race forever?
I think of interpretability as progressively unlocking things that are really useful. Like I think interpretability is already useful. I think inference time guardrails are a great example. We deployed inference time guardrails with Rakuten, who's one of our partners. And I know the Gemini team has now deployed interpretability-powered guardrails to production as well. So interpretability is already useful. I think our work with Prima Menta shows a glimpse of the future of ways that this can be useful for models that know things that we don't. I think our technology is improving pretty rapidly, and some of the work that we're doing in training is pretty exciting too. So for instance, we are putting out some research today, actually. It'll be in the past for your audience by the time this comes out, about we've identified hallucination, some signatures of hallucinations inside of the neuronal activations of models. Turns out models actually know when they're hallucinating a lot of the time. And we're able to increase, we're able to then use that as a training signal to decrease hallucinations. A gap as large as GPT-4o to GPT-5 in hallucination reduction by leveraging our understanding of how these models work.
Which was like from like half basically, right? Like from like 20% to like 9% on most tasks, and then it was like 20 to 5% on using search.
Yeah, it's a very, very significant reduction in hallucinations. And we're able to do this because the model like knows it's hallucinating. I don't know why I keep putting knows in air quotes, but
it's a real like AI. They're just like us moment, right? And knows when you're on acid, knows when you're tripping a little bit. Deep down.
The thing that we call hallucinations is actually a bunch of different phenomena. Like for instance, like hallucinations can be sycophancy in disguise, right? It could be like trying to please the user in some type of way. It could be that the model like doesn't actually know when it knows it doesn't know, but it feels for whatever reason like it has to say an answer. And so we're able to use interpretability to isolate when a model is hallucinating with very high accuracy, and then we're able to use that to train the model. So I think these are like examples of where we're going. This is already useful. Some more sort of ways we can use interpretability to improve models that I can talk about.
So if it knows that it's hallucinating, right? I think that's really interesting. Because it implies a deeper understanding in the models past the super advanced auto predictor, mass understanding of AI, right? That is just predicting the next word or part of a word in a string of tokens. One, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that a little bit more. Like, how are we misunderstanding what AI is actually doing? Is it knowing? How is it acknowledging those hallucinations? So let's start there, and then I'd love to dig into a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So the stochastic parrot model of AI is wrong. And I'm not the only person who thinks that. Jeff Hinton, Nobel laureate, is going around loudly saying the same thing. Basically, I train a model on all of the text on the internet. It's a reasonable thing to think. Is it like, is it just memorizing the text on the internet? And certainly it's memorizing some of the text. In fact, you can actually use interpretability to figure out what's memorized versus what's actually learned. We did a paper on this a while back. That's kind of interesting. There's no way. The internet's huge. I mean, think about how much text is on the internet. And then you have a model with finite capacity, right? It only has so many neurons. So to learn to predict the next token on the internet, the next word on the internet, it needs to learn about the distribution, human beings, that produced those tokens. It needs to learn knowledge about them in order to be able to do this task remotely successfully, because it just doesn't have enough parameters to memorize everything. One clear example of this is code, right? We're already at the point, there are some other steps involved here, such as reinforcement learning, but we're at the point where we have these LLMs that are able to automate software engineering as a profession, as I was saying earlier. How did they learn the code? They learned the code first by reading code on the internet. And it turns out that if you want to get really, really good at predicting what the next word in code should be, the fastest way to get there is to learn how to code, And this is just consistently been the story. Models are tangled messes inside, and like I view our job as an interpretability company to untangle that mess. But they consistently have rich representations, rich understanding of the world that is often pretty surprising, you know. And you can also point to all types of ways in which they fall over, you know, like maybe as an analogy, like imagine if you put a human in a totally dark room and you just gave them all of the text on the internet, and that was it, and they like read through all of that, and that was their entire experience. And then, you know, of course, you show them like a video with you know, with like some 3D rotation or something, and they'd very like Plato's cave be confused at what they were looking at.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I think it's like consistently been demonstrated that these models learn pretty rich understandings of the world. And hallucinations are just another example of that. When a model is outputting something that is factually inaccurate, it often is aware of its own uncertainty of the factual. It's whether, you know, it's aware of the factual accuracy of the statement and its own uncertainty about that statement that it's making. And that's what we can use interpretability to leverage by basically, like, in some sense, maybe reprogramming the model to say, hey, actually, if you're not sure about this, then just say that, you know, instead of trying to rush to an answer.
So is this why saying to a model, don't, you know, just provide information or make up information to please me, giving it permission to express uncertainty tends to reduce hallucinations when, say, you're using Claude?
That's right. Yeah, it's the same intuition behind it. And the reason that this ends up happening has to do with the training objectives of the model. You know, they're trained to be helpful assistants. You know, the thing that's in the data a lot, if you're a helpful assistant, is answer the user's question, right? Like the user asks you a question, answer it. So the natural thing for it to learn is to just try to answer the question the best that it possibly can. But if you actually, you know, scan the mind of the AI model, you find that it does often know, hey, like maybe that was a little sketchy, the thing I just said.
So I think a lot of people have this experience with AI over the last few years, especially because most people, their entry point is chatbots. Chatbots hallucinate. We've all, you know, seen that. People like my parents starting to engage with ChatGPT and think that it's all real and that it's not inaccurate. Sort of the worry train starts to leave the station, and that worry train gets me to, you know, like the point where we get baseball bats and like Faraday cages and we go smash the servers. And I'm wondering if you're seeing kind of the public backlash thing that I think I'm starting to see. Like I have like that train, sort of runaway train thing starting to happen to me, but I'm seeing bits here and there of people, even kind of in both political parties in the U.S., start to say, hey, maybe we should smash the servers, essentially. Like, but what are you observing on that, and where do you think is going to happen?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think that is a very understandable reaction for people to be having who are correctly observing the level of impact that this technology is going to have on their lives without any type of regulatory guardrails to protect them and to protect their economic livelihoods. You know, as I said, like earlier, I wish that we were in the world where we had more time to brace for impact. I think that would be a much, much better world to be in. Yeah, and I think people are correctly observing how quickly things are changing, how, you know, for myriad of reasons, not entirely AI, but I think people feel very disempowered, sort of economically, you know, politically in various ways across the political spectrum. You know, I think they correctly view AI as sort of this massive phase transition, which could either, you know, result in shared prosperity for human beings, or it could result in something authoritarian or much worse. And that anxiety is real. Because
it's dangerous when we're on the frontiers, or the inaccuracies can have bigger consequences?
Yeah. I mean, already I think models have risks. And the amount of risk they have today is going to be much less than the amount of risk they have in 2 years. But I think in particular, like cyber risk is getting pretty serious. You know, I think over the next year, because cyber risk is directly correlated with like how good at code you are, essentially, right? I think over the next year, we're going to see a pretty dramatic acceleration in the rate of cyber attacks. There are some examples of this already, and obviously, cyber attacks don't always reach the public because disclosing that they happened can encourage more cyber attacks, and you have to put in defensive measures and things like this. But I think that risk is like already pretty real, and it's a national security risk, frankly. And I think over the next couple of years, it'll accelerate. And some of the risk classes associated with AI over time, with autonomous weapons, for instance, they become very frightening and very severe, potentially very quickly. And we need not only like regulatory frameworks on the national level, we need international regulatory frameworks, something like nuclear non-proliferation to successfully mitigate the potential downside risks of this rapidly developing technology. So that's one component. The other component is I think we need strong redistributive mechanisms in society to prevent the overwhelming accumulation of wealth in the handful of a few individuals in Silicon Valley. Again, macroeconomic indicators are hard to fully unpack, but I do think like it is true that AI stock is holding up the economy right now. Like it would not be particularly good without AI growth. And you can get all the details about that AI growth and, whether we're sort of really seeing acceleration of the economy or not, but I think we will. And what happens when the economy accelerates, some people make a lot of money, and how do you make sure that the value that's getting created is distributed in a way that maximally benefits most people? I frankly think that nobody right now has a good answer to this question. And it should be extremely alarming to everyone that nobody has a good answer to.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, this massive divorce of GDP and economic growth from wage and labor growth right now that we're seeing, right, where this is a split off, right? Yes, the gap has been widening over the last 20 years, but now they're running on completely different tracks because we're realizing that we can automate so much of knowledge work right through AI, and all this does is end up enriching shareholders and the executives at these companies, and that's I think a really dangerous thing. And I think that's one reason that we're seeing this rise in, even surprisingly on the right, of populist messaging against that. We have Governor DeSantis introducing an AI Bill of Rights in Florida. We have Spencer Cox, the governor of Utah, introducing AI worker protection and chatbot regulation initiatives there. Josh Hawley came out with like a very Josh Hawley sermon on it, which I just kind of want to read because it actually mirrored what you just said. He said, it is working against the working man, his liberty and his worth. It is operating to instill a rich and powerful elite. It is undermining our cherished ideals. And insofar as that keeps on, AI works to undermine America. Like that's like strong ass rhetoric that we're
this
seeing.
Is from the pro-business, the presumably more pro-business party, right?
Yeah, and like Josh Hawley is like the most populist, maybe Republican senator, at least in his rhetoric, if not in what he actually supports legislatively. But that to me is like a really big signal when we're seeing this from the right, which tried to ban any sort of statewide regulation of AI in the big, beautiful bill. So this feels like a real turning point to me right now.
I completely agree with that. I think the anger and the fear that people feel is both real and understandable. And we are barreling forward with reckless abandon. I think developing AI technology is really important. I do think like it would be a mistake for America to not continue developing AI technology without the types of international agreements in place, such as nuclear non-proliferation that can protect all of humanity. We're on a big interconnected globe here, and I don't think a world where America willingly abdicates its technological edge is necessarily going to be a better world. That being said, I think there is a moral urgency of the moment. I am happy to see that this issue is being taken seriously by both parties, and I hope it remains bipartisan, and I hope the understandable fear that people are feeling can be channeled towards a very productive outcome.
That's a very diplomatic answer. I enjoyed it. But to kind of bring this back real quick, to what we were talking about before in terms of the gap between the rhetoric in the AI industry and the reality, right? The promise of advancement, right? Of scientific breakthroughs, energy breakthroughs, and a lot of what we see in AI, the deep fakes, the god awful LinkedIn posts, the slop of it all.
Yeah, erotic chatbots instead of
erotic
cures for
chatbots.
cancer.
Yeah, the Meta, having chatbots that in their documentation are allowed to flirt with your 12-year-olds, and the reality of it. I'm curious from your Silicon Valley, seat, why you think that, because I think that's a lot of what contributes to this animosity towards AI is this gap between the promise and what we actually see. And I think some companies like Anthropic are actually doing it quite well in their positioning. And it's like, this is AI that'll help you do your job better for now, which is really promising to a lot of early adopters. Like, oh, I don't have to make a PowerPoint out of that Excel file. Like, I have integrations for that. That's awesome. This is busy work I don't really want to do. But I'm curious, when you look at other players in the industry, why do you think there's such a gap between some of the rhetoric that they might put out at Davos about the problems AI is going to solve and what we actually see in terms of the commercially available products that are put in people's hands and the actual usage of those AI products, where I think for OpenAI, it's like 73% of the way that people use ChatGPT isn't for work. So why do we see those sort of gaps, do you think, between promise and reality?
I guess at the highest level, I would say that it is the nature of slop that there is always going to be more slop than good, right? Like that was the story of like social media even before AI.
Right.
It's just cheap to produce slop and it's hard to produce good things. And so if you have a technology that is like generative and can produce things, most of the things it produces will be slop. I think both of those things are happening at once. I think we are seeing like medical advancements because of AI. And it starts slow, and then it trickles, and then it picks up and it accelerates, and that's been the same trajectory with all the technology. A good recent example of this is like unsolved math problems. There's AI is now probably about like 3 or 4 months ago. There was an announcement that AI had solved an unsolved math problem, and it was heavily disputed, and it turned out maybe that problem wasn't actually unsolved, and there's a lot of back and forth on this. And now a few months later, like these unsolved math problems are just like falling like left and right, like there's a new one every week, and I think that is a good sort of example of the first time AIs are capable of doing anything, it's going to be extremely disputed. And in fact, the first time anyone claims an AI can do something, they're probably wrong, and then over time, they just start being able to do more and more of these tasks, and they accelerate things. So I think we are seeing advancements in science because of AI directly. I think if you talk to almost all scientists, let me actually go back for a second. I think if you talk to many scientists, they are actively using Claude Code, for instance, to accelerate their own research. We use AI to do experiments for us, to conduct experiments for us. This type of acceleration will pay off for the economy in ways that are positive. The question is just does the good outweigh the bad on balance? But I think that naturally, slop is cheap and easy to make and makes you money. And so the incentives to produce a lot of slop are there, but it doesn't mean the good things aren't happening either.
Yeah, it's like, how many god-awful LinkedIn parables do I have to read before we cure cancer? Thousands, millions, billions, we just don't know. But no, I get you. It's a pain that I will have to endure for the good of humanity.
Well, I think we can have the good without the bad. I think that is a solvable problem. And we just need leaders who are willing to take that problem on.
Yeah. So, this podcast is it's on the theme of this idea that when, most of the world is seeing things a certain way or heading in a certain direction, some people and companies choose to head the other direction or look at things from a different perspective. And I think the work that y'all are doing is a great example of that. And I think it's what we're going to need if we're going to get to the outcome, that we want for all of humanity, like if we just sort of all jump on the same bandwagon, the risks and the likelihood of things going, wrong are much higher than if some people are, eschewing the bandwagon and looking at things from other angles. So I think as we close out, knowing you're busy, hopefully saving us from Terminator, among other things, who do you look at as examples of other folks who zag when the rest of the world zigs? Like whose ideas do you pay attention to, or who do you think we should pay attention to that are also thinking or moving kind of counter to sort of the trends?
Yeah, I guess it's like with a lot of people, you take the good with the bad, right? But I think like I can definitely comment on, some examples of people I think that have demonstrated what I view as like high integrity, and I think in many ways, like you sort of successfully zigzagging is, kind of having a certain type of values or a certain type of integrity when other people don't. So I think Dario Amodei at Anthropic is someone who I think has generally done a pretty good job of threading what is an extremely difficult needle of developing this technology, but trying to make sure that as a company, Anthropic is doing this in as responsible a way as they can be. They have not been perfect. They've made a bunch of mistakes. But I think it's a enormously challenging and important thing that people who are developing these frontier systems are doing so in a way that takes the level of responsibility of what's being developed very seriously. I think Demis Hassabis is also someone who I respect a lot. I think really like has articulated the positive vision of what AI can do really well. I also respect a lot. Recently, Adava said that he would, support sort of policies like I was talking about regarding international cooperation on slowing AI development, if that were feasible to do. I think that was a courageous thing for him to say publicly, given his circumstance, and I respect that immensely.
As always, our final question: what's one counterintuitive idea that you think everyone listening to this should consider?
You know what? I actually have a good answer. The reason that I was able to see AI coming, I think, faster than a lot of people were, was because of the fact that, I have a very sort of Copernican mindset, by which I mean, people thought the Earth was the center of the universe. Turned out it wasn't, Turns out there's maybe not that much that's special about our sun or our Earth or maybe even life in the universe, right? Like these things are natural and consequences of the laws of physics, and maybe not that rare. Maybe intelligent life is rare. We'll leave that off for a second, but nonetheless, like we are sort of consequences of the universe, and I think therefore I think it is like quite likely that almost every quality that can be imbued in a human can be imbued in a machine. And I think that idea is very important to take seriously, to calibrate on the level of risk that AI will deliver seriously. The story up until now has, as I said, it's been pointing at the deficiencies of AI, and I get it. Like I don't want AI to be getting better. I'd rather be in that world. But I think it's going to continue to get smarter, and it's going to, be at human intelligence and then potentially exceed human intelligence in the not that distant future, because the only thing that constrains its intelligence is the laws of physics. And, I think it's a very difficult thing to grapple with, and it is existentially challenging, but I think it's really important to see with the world with clarity.
So when you say that, just to follow up, do you think that includes like the ability to have like a moral compass and to kind of like the human values and feelings, that we have, that's also, going to be the case?
Of course. AI? Yeah, of course. I think AI absolutely can and does have values. And like the problem that we're trying to solve is like, how do you put the values you want in that AI to begin with, which is not something that anybody in the world right now has an answer to. And I think that should be alarming.
Well, Dan, this was an inspiring, enlightening, and terrifying conversation. We really appreciate you being on, and I look forward to seeing you in my nightmares tonight.
I should say at the end of the day, like, I am perpetually an optimist, but I do think in order to navigate the situation that we're in, we do have to see it with clear eyes.
Well, I'm grateful for that there's people like you working on this problem of understanding these things that we're growing so that we do stand a chance. I think that's, we could be living in a world where that effort wasn't going on, and then that would be truly terrifying. So yeah, thanks for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for doing what we're doing while schmucks like us are just podcasting in black t-shirts. You're doing the real work, and we're just hoping that we continue to be charming enough to be one of those few humans whose human relational work will make us immune to the sweeping tsunami of changes that are coming. So
thank you for having me. And if any folks in the audience are interested in what we're doing or interested in getting involved, they can definitely reach out to us.
Cool. Yeah, we'll put Goodfire in the show notes, as well as any AI research job listings that you guys have up right now, because I know you're always hiring. And good God, if you're smart, like, please go work with these guys, because they're trying to save the world from AI. So we need as many really smart people who understand AI research as we can working at Goodfire. So let's get them over there.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dan. All right. Man, that was a hell of a conversation.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, for someone who calls himself an optimist, he is very real about what's going on. That's the sort of the dark side of this whole AI thing. But I'm feeling better about the general state of things now after that conversation.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in between. Like my as before this, like my pdoom. Well, I think it's covering about the same. I was not kidding. I think he might be in my nightmares a little bit with some of this stuff. But I am very reassured that someone like Dan is working on this. And I hope it's a field that really gets a lot more recognition, because honestly, we need more investment in this and less investment in weird AI porn being made by Grok.
Yeah. No, I think my big conclusion is, I started the conversation thinking eventually I may need to round up a bunch of people with baseball bats to smash the servers before AI kills us. And now I think that maybe we'll need to smash the servers before AI gets rid of all the jobs. And that's going to be a big political issue, I think, over the next little bit. But if, the AI getting out of hand problem is something that's being seriously addressed now, that puts us in a better place to address the, what do we do to help people who are being displaced with their jobs by AI, which still an awful problem, still an enormous problem, but a less existentially sort of terrifying problem than the collapse of, all mankind.
Well, given that it seems like all successful politicians now are just podcasters, maybe we just run on a, anti-AI populist ticket in 2028, see what happens.
Yeah. I don't want to hold a public office, but, if we must, I think actually what I thought you were going to say is we should book Dan on every one of these politicians' podcasts. So I feel if the people who are casting votes in Congress understood what he understands about what's going on, I think we would have, I would feel a lot better about the state of things.
Yeah, shit. Yeah. Where's Gavin Newsom's booker? You listen to this show? Book Dan on your podcast. Is he going to TED? Maybe we could find him there, round him up, try and get him to have Dan on. Yeah. Or Pete Buttigieg probably has a podcast, right?
I mean, I follow him on Substack. He's posting videos all the time. I don't know if he has a podcast, but he should interview this guy.
All right. I'll slip into his DMs. Let's wrap this up this week with our Zag of the Week. New feature every week. We're going to pick a Zag in the world that stood out to us, someone who is zagging while everyone else is zigging and winning as a result. Shane, you want to start?
Yeah, so this week was the Super Bowl, and I have to admit I tuned in for halftime, and then I didn't even know who won because I tuned out after halftime because football's not my thing. But I am a huge Bad Bunny fan, and obviously I went into it excited to see the Bad Bunny performance. But I can't think of a Super Bowl performance that did what they did. They built basically like a mini Puerto Rico out on the field, and it was a cinematic montage of music. Usually it's montage, but it's sort of a concert. It's like a medley of songs, But they had a follow cam with amazing camera work that mixed pre-recorded segments, Bad Bunny like dropping through the roof of a house and getting dust all over him, like, the Turn Down for What music video. And then he kicks the door open and he's back on the field. They pre-recorded some stuff and they lined it up with the choreography so that it felt like you were watching the world's most incredible cinematic music video. And I think that itself is just an example of really clever performance, really clever art that you don't see. The safe thing to do for a Super Bowl performance is what everyone has always done. I think this has now set a high bar. I think also with that, there's plenty of commentary about, Bad Bunny being the performer and, the racists who don't understand that he's an American just because he's brown and he speaks Spanish as his first language, being from Puerto Rico. Besides that, I think it was a really bold performance, but I loved the ending when he and everyone else, that were out there, dancing, ran with all of the flags of all of the American countries. When I took Spanish, 1 in freshman year of high school, one of the first things we learned was todos somos americanos. We are all American. And he listed out, Guatemala, Cuba, Brazil, Bolivia, and they had all of those flags. And, the United States was there and in front. And, when he said, God bless America, the message was we're all fellow human beings and we should be in this together, which I think, again, shouldn't be a zag, but is something that we don't talk about and we don't think about. And, putting yourself out there in this very American patriotic place to say that, I think was great and bold and good for the world.
Yeah, and this message that like a message of love conquers a message of hate, right? I thought that was beautiful. And it was an incredible moment that transcended words, and everything about that performance was fantastic. I wasn't sure. I was talking about this with my doorman about whether the drop through the roof was pre-recorded or not. Because I was like, did they get that shot live? Like, that's crazy. Because the way
really
that they filmed
good.
it seemed like they could have gotten it live. So it was the way it was integrated.
How you could tell is the continuity of the dust on his shoulders when he came out the door was different than in the video. That was the only way I could tell.
Could tell that you've been on a lot of sets the last few years.
This is maybe my job. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, my Zag of the Week is also Super Bowl related, but instead here, I'm actually going to get into football. This is the point where I lose everyone on the podcast. But I think that football is actually an extremely underrated intellectual game overall, both in the way that you think about team building as well as the tactics on the field. Like any sport, football is by far the most complicated sport. You have 11 players on each side moving in incredibly complicated, synchronized ways, right? There is a game within a game. There are coverages that are being disguised at every single level. There's loops and blitzes that are trying to trick the offensive line. It's intellectually like being smart is a huge part of being successful at football.
I like that part about football.
Yeah. It's like the podcasts I listen to, like the Athletic Football Show, are like deep nerd podcasts, right? Like it's mostly like talking about advanced metrics and really complicated game within the game, schematic strategies. But there's also the team building strategy, which is the other layer of it. So like in every industry, football has trends that everyone jumps on. You remember in media when Facebook lied about how many video views every publisher got, there was a pivot to video. Similarly, there are trends in football. Like the last 10 years has been really dominated by this shift to as much emphasis on offense as possible. Like if you have a great quarterback, you have a high-scoring offense, that's all that really matters. Whereas the old school kind of classical method or cliche in football was that defense wins championships, right? You try and build these really tough-nosed teams that when it got to cold weather, got to the playoffs, could kind of grind and choke other teams out and win that way. But it was this huge shift away to offense, smaller players, more spread out, lots of passing in the last 10 years. Like in a lot of industries, think about this with media and the return to subscriptions and more owned audiences and away from a lot of the digital hacks that we had the last 10 years. In football, similarly, there's been a shift this season back towards defense, right? And the Seahawks, who won the Super Bowl, despite being, I think, 60-1 odds before the season, one of the biggest long shot Super Bowl winners in a long time, they built their team differently than a lot of other people were in the league. So they hired, instead of a hotshot offensive play caller, which has been the trend in head coaching hiring over the last decade, they hired the best young defensive play caller, Mike McDonald from the Ravens, who was their defensive coordinator 2 years ago. They, instead of going and trying to either draft a quarterback really highly in the top 5, which is seen as the only really viable way to get a quarterback who can win a Super Bowl, they made a bet on Sam Darnold, who was this former high first-round pick who is now on his 6th team in his career to a mid-level contract to quarterback their team. And it all came together in a way where they were able to build a team that just played and did things differently than the rest of the league was doing. Their defense was so suffocating, so hard-nosed, hit so hard that it allowed them to really control the pace of games, right, to get to these early leads because the other team couldn't score. They brought in a new offensive coordinator and were able to design an offense around Sam Darnold, their journeyman quarterback's flaws, to be about a little bit better than a league average offense. And it all came together to win a Super Bowl handily. Like, they absolutely dominated the Patriots in that game. They beat the Rams in the NFC Championship game, who everyone thought was the best team in the league. And I think it shows something bigger. I'm going to bring this around to a bigger point, which is that in every industry, I think we see these cycles play out, right? Where everyone goes in one direction really hard, and then there's usually an opportunity to go the other way around. In my world of marketing, for instance, there was 10 years ago this emphasis on brand and content and storytelling. There became some disillusionment with it because it wasn't integrated into the rest of marketing. You saw everyone go really hard on all of these digital ad platforms, right? Facebook, LinkedIn, Google Ads, programmatic, et cetera. But there's been a circle back around now where everyone's coming back to content and storytelling because we realize that those platforms all got saturated, and there is a really easy way to win by investing in the things that other companies aren't investing in. And that's like a simple heuristic I think we can usually use that works more often than not in most industries, that when everyone's going like really hard one way on a trend, usually by circling back to the thing that was working well before everyone started going that way and just adjusting a little bit. The Seahawks aren't running the same defense or offensive schemes as 10 years ago. They're putting a modern flavor of it, but that you can find those high margin opportunities to outpace the competition.
I like this heuristic. I mean, it strikes me that in both these examples you gave, both the marketing, advertising, and football, it's a competitive environment. So you could say that the heuristic to test is when the pendulum swings in a competitive environment for everyone chasing, a certain strategy, going back to the strategy that worked before, and modernizing it will competitively help you stand out, and chances are give you an advantage depending on obviously the details. I think that's really great.
You'll probably see this happen the other way in football, right? You're going to see a lot of teams try to invest in defense, hire more mid-level quarterbacks like Sam Darnold. Eventually, maybe we'll go down a defensive path for 5 or 10 years, and then we'll swing back to offense. Like, these things constantly happen. I think in AI, there's a lot of ways that we can see this playing out as well. Everyone goes to automate everything with AI. They lose the human touch. Companies that invest in the human touch will probably have an advantage. So that's a good one just to think about this week for your industry. Like, what does that look like? What's that trend that's been dominating that maybe you can swing back around on? If you have any good examples of that, shoot us a reply, an email if you get this on Substack, in the comments on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, and maybe we'll call some of those out if they're good on the next episode.
All right.
Cool. All right, well, that's all we have for this week. Stay zaggy, my friends, and we'll see you soon.